Is Jude Bellingham England's new hero, or just another product of media hype? His performances at the World Cup have seen him compared to Diego Maradona and Pelé. Some pundits even believe he could become the greatest English footballer of all time. But how did a boy from Birmingham become a global superstar before even turning 22? The answer didn't begin at the World Cup. It began years earlier. To answer that question, we have to go back to where it all began, long before the spotlight ever found him. Before he became a superstar celebrated across Europe, Jude Bellingham was just a boy growing up in Starbridge, on the outskirts of Birmingham, in a family where football wasn't a luxury. It was the greatest gift they could give their son. His father, Mark Bellingham, was a semi-professional footballer, not a superstar. Not a millionaire with lucrative contracts. Just a man who played in England's lower leagues on weekends before returning to his job as a police officer during the week. It was Mark who first noticed something different about his son. Not dazzling skills, not extraordinary flair, but something far harder to describe, an obsession with winning. Even in kickabouts on local pitches, where nobody was watching. At the age of 8, Bellingham joined the Birmingham City Academy. At a mid-table English club, the chances of a young academy player breaking into the first team were incredibly slim. But Bellingham was never destined to follow the ordinary path. At just 16 years old, he made his first-team debut for Birmingham City in the EFL Championship, becoming the youngest player in the club's 146-year history to appear for the senior team. That was the moment the story took a turn no one saw coming. Some of England's biggest clubs, including Manchester United, were all chasing Jude Bellingham's signature, but his family made a decision that stunned the football world. They turned down every Premier League offer and sent their 17-year-old son to Germany to join Borussia Dortmund. Back in England, many saw it as a reckless gamble, leaving his home, leaving his family, leaving behind the football culture he had always known, to move to a foreign country, learn a new language, and adapt to an entirely different system, at an age when most of his peers were still trying to establish themselves in youth football. But Bellingham and his family believed one thing: if you want to become the best player in the world, you can't choose the safest path. Borussia Dortmund had long been known as football's ultimate launchpad for young talent. It was the club where players like Erling Haaland, Ousmane Dembélé, and Jadon Sancho had taken the next step before reaching the very top of world football. But even in a club accustomed to developing extraordinary youngsters, Jude Bellingham still managed to surprise German football. Just a few weeks after arriving, he made his Bundesliga debut. Before long, he became the youngest goalscorer in Borussia Dortmund's history. Yet what truly impressed the coaching staff wasn't the goal itself. It was the way a 17- and 18-year-old midfielder could organize senior teammates in the dressing room, argue his case with referees, and never look intimidated by opponents twice his age. At the highest level of football, there's a huge difference between a talented young player and a young player with the mentality to lead. Bellingham belonged to the rare group blessed with both. During his 3 seasons at Dortmund, he didn't just develop into one of Europe's most complete box-to-box midfielders, capable of defending, creating chances, and scoring goals with equal effectiveness. He also learned something no academy in the world can truly teach: how to take responsibility when an entire team needs someone to step up. By 2023, when Bellingham left Dortmund, he was no longer simply one of football's brightest young prospects. He had become one of the most sought-after midfielders in the world, sparking a transfer race that every European giant wanted to win. And in the end, Real Madrid emerged victorious. If Dortmund was where Jude Bellingham learned how to become a leader, then Real Madrid became the place where he learned to live with relentless pressure. No club in world football demands greatness quite like Real Madrid. This is a club where even legends are questioned after just a few quiet performances. A place where history is never enough, and yesterday's hero can become today's disappointment. Bellingham arrived in Madrid carrying a transfer fee and expectations heavy enough to crush almost any 20-year-old footballer. But instead of being consumed by the pressure, he embraced it. From his very first season, he scored at a rate that exceeded even the boldest expectations inside the Spanish capital. Match-winning goals in El Clasico, dramatic stoppage-time winners, moments that brought the entire Santiago Bernabeu to its feet. Spain's notoriously demanding football media quickly began using words rarely reserved for a newcomer: the new savior, the heir to the spirit of Real Madrid. But this was also where a familiar pattern in Bellingham's career returned. The greater the expectations became, the greater the scrutiny. There were dips in form, matches where he disappeared, and almost immediately, the same question echoed once again. Had the football world already seen Bellingham's true ceiling, or was this simply the calm before another explosion? As he always had throughout his career, Bellingham chose not to answer with interviews. He answered on the pitch, with his performances, not with excuses. If Bellingham learned to carry the weight of a football club at Real Madrid, then with England, he was carrying the weight of an entire nation. A nation that had spent almost 6 decades waiting for another major trophy. Ever since lifting the World Cup in 1966, the Three Lions have produced generation after generation of extraordinary talent, yet somehow they always fell short when it mattered most. And at the 2026 World Cup, that burden was placed on the shoulders of another young generation. With Jude Bellingham at its heart, he didn't let England down. His performances throughout the knockout stages drew comparisons with some of the greatest World Cup displays ever witnessed. The BBC likened his impact to Ronaldo Nazario's unforgettable 2002 campaign, a player capable of dragging his nation beyond what anyone believed was possible. Gary Lineker, one of England's greatest ever strikers, went even further. He openly suggested that Bellingham could one day become the greatest player in the history of the Three Lions. But amid all the praise, Thomas Tuchel offered a different perspective. He admitted that England's overall performances had often been untidy and that they had needed more than a little fortune to reach the semi-finals. At the same time, he made one thing perfectly clear. Bellingham was a world-class footballer, the kind of player who always seems to appear when the biggest moments arrive. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a more measured assessment from a manager who refused to let an entire team be swept away by the brilliance of one extraordinary individual. And Bellingham himself, instead of embracing the spotlight alone, chose to stand beside his teammates. He rejected the idea that England's journey was the story of one man carrying an entire nation on his shoulders. Because to him, football has never been about one player, not even when that player is being compared with Diego Maradona and Pelé. So what's the answer to the question we asked at the very beginning? Is Jude Bellingham truly England's hero, or simply a product of media hype? Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. The media aren't wrong to celebrate what he's achieved on the pitch. From a 17-year-old who left Birmingham to chase a dream to a player now being mentioned alongside some of the greatest names football has ever known. But Thomas Tuchel isn't wrong either, when he reminds everyone that one extraordinary player doesn't automatically make an extraordinary team. And perhaps the most revealing part of Bellingham's story isn't the praise, it's how he responds to it. He refuses to take all the credit. He steps forward to defend his teammates. Because to him, football has never been about one man carrying everyone else, even when the entire world is comparing him to Maradona and Pelé. That may be the clearest window into who Jude Bellingham really is. A player shaped not by headlines, but by responsibility. A responsibility forged the moment he left home as a teenager. and strengthened every step of his journey. His story is still being written. Many more chapters are still to come. But one thing is already certain. No matter what the media says, the person who will ultimately decide how this story ends will always be Jude Bellingham himself. Out on the pitch,